Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. It was another quiet night at the subway station. The kind of night where everything feels heavier, like the world itself is holding its breath. The flickering lights overhead buzzed with a faint hum, casting long, uneven shadows that stretched across the concrete floor. I had grown used to the silence, the hum of machinery, the occasional rumble of distant trains. And yet, tonight, there was something different. I leaned back in the control booth, my eyes half-lidded, the exhaustion from the long hours settling into my bones. The station was as empty as it always was. It was the middle of the night after all. The only thing keeping me from losing my mind was the rhythm of the place, the cold, mechanical lullaby of the subway. But even that tonight felt off. It's like the quiet was a little too quiet, the stillness a little too thick. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I checked the clock. 2 a.m., the graveyard shift. Everyone else was tucked away in their beds except for me, the ghost of this underground world. The trains ran in their usual cycles, predictable, repetitive. I had seen it all before. Drunk passengers stumbling on board, their faces blank and lost. Commuters too tired to care about the world around them. But there was always this lingering thought in the back of my mind, that maybe, just maybe, one of these passengers wouldn't leave, that they'd stay, that they'd just vanish. The cold air crept in from the tunnels, causing a shiver to crawl down my spine. I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly warm. The subway had become my refuge, my place to hide away from the pain of a past I couldn't outrun. The memories of that night, the accident, the ones I lost, they still haunted me. And this station, this forsaken place, had become my shelter. A place where the ghosts of my past couldn't follow. Or so I thought. But tonight, there was a shift in the air. A chill that was more than just temperature. Something felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stood up and moved to the glass of the control booth, peering out at the platform. It was empty, like it always was. No movement, no noise, just the occasional flicker of the lights. But then, something caught my eye. There, at the far end of the train platform, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, some shadow playing games with my tired mind. But no, as I focused, my heart skipped a beat. There was a man sitting at the far end of the train. He was motionless, completely still, staring out of the window. A shiver ran down my spine. The train had just arrived. It should have been bustling with the usual late-night wanderers. But the man, he was alone, and he didn't move. I squinted, trying to make out details. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, worn, faded, like it hadn't seen the light of day in ages. His skin was pale, almost ghostly, and his face was unnervingly gaunt, hollow, like someone who had been starved for days, if not weeks. But it was his eyes that really got to me. They were dark, empty pits. Hollow, soulless. There was no life in them. Just an eerie, lifeless void. And yet, somehow, they felt like they were staring directly at me. Watching me. I don't know why, but something inside me told me to go investigate. I was drawn to him, almost like a moth to a flame. The unease was gnawing at my insides, but my feet moved on their own, carrying me out of the booth and toward the platform. Each step I took felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder with every inch I moved, the oppressive silence suffocating me. As I walked closer, I noticed the temperature dropping rapidly. It wasn't just the usual chill of the underground. It felt like something else, something unnatural. My breath began to form small clouds of mist in the air. I reached the edge of the platform and took a deep breath, my eyes never leaving the figure. I called out to him, my voice echoing unnervingly in the quiet. "Hey, you need to get off." The train's about to go out of service. There was no response, not even a twitch. He didn't move, he didn't blink, he was just sitting there, frozen in place. I stepped closer, feeling an increasing unease settle in my chest. I called out again, this time louder, but still there was nothing. I felt this deep, gnawing sense of dread, the kind that you can't shake, the kind that tells you something is terribly wrong, something beyond the ordinary. I reached out, slowly, almost instinctively. My fingers brushed the man's shoulder, and in that moment a rush of cold flooded my senses. It wasn't just cold, it was freezing, as if the very air around me had dropped into sub-zero temperatures. My hand went numb instantly, as if I had plunged it into ice water. The air grew thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The man's body remained completely still, as if he weren't even real. I pulled my hand back, heart pounding, breath coming in quick gasps. Something was wrong. This wasn't just some drunk, some lost passenger who had wandered on board by mistake. No, this was something else. I stumbled back, my pulse racing, my body trembling with the cold that seemed to seep into my bones. And as I backed away, my eyes couldn't help but glance at the other trains parked along the platform. The station cameras flashed in my mind, and I instinctively pulled out my phone, trying to see if I could spot the man earlier in the footage. But when I scrolled through the grainy video feed of the platform, I froze. The train, the one with the man sitting at the far end. It was empty in the footage. There was no one there, not a soul. I looked back at the train, my hands shaking. There he was, still there. The same pale, hollow-eyed man staring out the window. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. And then, I saw something that made my stomach twist into a knot. On my phone, I pulled up an old missing persons report, one I had never noticed before. The face in the photograph, the name, it was mine. Daniel Ruiz. Missing. Last seen, 5 years ago. My breath hitched in my throat as the horrifying truth began to sink in. This wasn't a person at all. This was me. It was my face, my body. I had been declared dead. I had died in that car crash, along with my family. But somehow, I was still here. Trapped. I turned back to the man, my own reflection staring back at me from those hollow, empty eyes. I wasn't alive. I wasn't alive at all. And that was when the station seemed to close in on me. The station was dead silent. That strange, suffocating stillness that clung to the air like a thick fog. The kind of silence that gnaws at you, makes your skin crawl, makes every small noise feel like a scream in the darkness. The lights above buzzed intermittently, flickering as though they were about to go out at any moment. But still, they hung there, casting long, uneven shadows that stretched across the cold, sterile concrete floor. And there I was, alone in the booth, watching it all. I've gotten used to the night shifts. There's a strange comfort in the silence, the routine. The trains come and go, the world above oblivious to what happens below. I've always been content with that. I've learned to blend into the shadows of this place, to fade into the hum of the subway tunnels. The ghosts of my past have no place here, or so I thought. But tonight something felt off. I looked at the clock. It was almost 2 a.m., right in the middle of the graveyard shift. The kind of time when the station empties out and the world above is fast asleep. Nothing unusual, right? But there was a chill in the air that I couldn't shake. It was colder than usual. And it wasn't just the air. It was something deeper. Something crawling under my skin, whispering that I wasn't alone. I stood up from the booth and walked toward the window, eyes scanning the platform. It was empty. The usual late-night drunks, the commuters too tired to notice the silence. None of them were here. The station felt too quiet. Even the trains had stopped making their usual noises. And then, as if on cue, I heard it. The familiar screech of the train's wheels on the tracks. It was coming. The doors slid open with a soft, metallic hiss, but there was no rush, no clamor of passengers exiting or boarding. The train just sat there, alone, in the dim light of the platform. I squinted, trying to make sense of the scene, but what I saw made my heart skip a beat. A figure. A man. He sat motionless at the far end of the train, staring out the window with a blank, unblinking gaze. His posture was rigid, his hands resting in his lap, frozen in place. He didn't even seem to notice the train had stopped. My heart started to race. I knew something wasn't right. The man's appearance, pale, gaunt, almost sickly, sent an uneasy shiver down my spine. His eyes were the worst part. Dark, hollow, devoid of any emotion. They were black pits, as if they had no depth. Like he wasn't truly there. I thought I must be imagining things. But the train was there, standing still on the tracks, and so was he, unmoving. His vacant stare was locked in place, and despite every instinct in my body telling me to walk away, I couldn't help it. I was drawn to him. The air seemed to grow heavier, the silence growing louder in my ears. It was like the station was holding its breath. I stepped forward, one foot after the other, the sound of my boots echoing on the platform. Too loud, too harsh against the oppressive quiet. The closer I got to the train, the colder it became. A strange, unnatural chill settled in the pit of my stomach. The kind of cold you feel in your bones. The kind that makes you want to run, to escape. But my feet carried me forward anyway. I approached the train, the man still sitting at the far end, eyes fixed on the window, unmoving. I cleared my throat, trying to break the eerie silence. "Hey," I called out. My voice sounded strangely small in the vast emptiness. "You need to get off. The train's about to go out of service." I waited. No answer. Nothing. Just that blank stare. His body was perfectly still. Too still. "Hey," I called out again, louder this time, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "You need to get off." Still nothing. The man didn't blink, didn't move an inch. It was as if I wasn't even there. My heart started pounding in my chest. I knew I had to do something. The cold, creeping around me, was starting to feel like it was coming from inside the train itself. I couldn't quite place it, but the air felt wrong. The silence was suffocating. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand trembling as I extended it toward the man's shoulder. The moment my fingers brushed against the fabric of his suit, I felt it. A wave of cold so intense, it stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't just a chill in the air, it was ice, sharp, biting, like I had touched something frozen in time. My fingers went numb instantly, as if I'd plunged them into a bucket of ice water. I pulled my hand back, gasping for air. The cold didn't leave, it lingered. I could feel it in my chest, in my very bones. It was as though the temperature had dropped by several degrees in an instant. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest, my legs feeling like jelly beneath me. What was happening? This wasn't normal. Nothing about this felt right. I looked back at the man, hoping for some sign of movement, some acknowledgement that he was alive. but his eyes remained locked on the window. Blank. Empty. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Something was wrong. I could feel it deep in my gut. I turned and stumbled back a few steps, my mind reeling. The train doors, they were opening. Slowly, creaking open as if they had a life of their own. The sound sent a shock through me. It wasn't supposed to be happening. The train wasn't supposed to move. The doors weren't supposed to open. My legs moved before my brain had a chance to process what was happening. I could feel my body walking toward the open doors, my feet dragging me forward as if something was pulling me in. My heart raced, my breath shallow and ragged. And then, as I passed the threshold, a sickening realization struck me. There was no one else on the train. It was empty, completely empty, except for the man who had never moved, the man who never spoke, the man who, despite all reason, looked like me. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, a desperate need to check the station cameras. I pulled up the footage, watching the grainy images flicker on the screen. And there it was, the same man. His face, my face, a ghostly reflection. I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat, unable to move. The man on the train, he was me. And just as that sickening truth settled in, the train doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside with him. I wasn't alive anymore. I had never been alive. The air in the train car felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. I stood there, my heart racing in my chest, my breath coming out in short, shallow bursts. My eyes were glued to the screen in my hand, desperately scrolling through the station's security footage. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but something deep in my gut told me that I needed to see it, that I needed to make sense of what had just happened. The train doors had slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. I'd felt the weight of the metal as if it was locking me in, as if something, or someone, was making sure I couldn't escape. The chill in the air had grown colder, almost unbearable, and every part of me screamed to leave, to get out, to run. But I couldn't. I needed answers. I pulled up the footage of the platform from earlier in the night, watching the grainy, pixelated images flicker to life on the screen. My finger hovered over the screen, desperately swiping through the different camera angles, hoping to find something that would make sense of what I had seen, or at least convince me that I was just imagining things. But as the footage loaded, it hit me. The train was empty. It was just sitting there on the platform, the doors closed, the lights flickering dimly, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But it was out of the ordinary. I knew it was. I had seen the man, the figure, in the car just a moment ago. He was sitting there, his eyes wide open, fixed on nothing. Not a single person had gotten on or off the train, even though it had stopped for several minutes. My breath hitched, and I scrolled again. The footage shifted to the view inside the train car. My pulse spiked. There he was, the same man. The same pale, lifeless figure sitting at the far end of the train. His body still, his hands resting unnaturally in his lap, his eyes staring ahead, unblinking, unfeeling. And in that moment my blood ran cold. His face. It was me. It was my face. The man in the footage was wearing the same clothes I was wearing, sitting in the same spot where I had just stood. And his eyes, those hollow, black pits, were staring straight into the camera, straight into me. I tried to look away, but my eyes were frozen to the screen, unable to move. I scrolled frantically, trying to get to the next feed, my fingers trembling, slick with sweat. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought the growing realization that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Something I couldn't understand. The next screen showed the train car from another angle. And again, there he was. Only this time, I could see him even clearer. The man's skin was sickly pale, his features gaunt, his body withering like a corpse that had been left to rot. And there, his eyes were wide open, but they were empty, hollow. I could feel the weight of his gaze even though it was through a screen. I scrolled again, hoping, praying, that this was all some sick joke, some error in the footage, but it wasn't. The same face, the same eyes, staring back at me from the small screen in my hand. But it wasn't just the face that sent terror crawling down my spine. It was the name beneath it. The name I had never expected to see. Daniel Ruiz. My name. I couldn't breathe. I felt the air leave my lungs in one violent exhale as the walls around me seemed to close in. This wasn't possible. I wasn't dead. I couldn't be. I had died. I had died years ago in that car crash. The one that took everything from me. The crash that had torn my family apart, that had left me nothing but a memory to the world above. But this man, it was me. The date beneath my name sent a shockwave through my body. It was the exact same date as the night I had died. I didn't understand. How could this be happening? How could I still be here? How could I still be walking this cursed train, trapped in a loop that I couldn't escape? I dropped my phone, my mind spiraling into chaos as I tried to make sense of it. But nothing made sense. The train rattled beneath me, the metal groaning as if the very car itself was aware of what was happening. I looked up, but the figure, the man, was still there. Still sitting. Still staring at me with those eyes. And as much as I wanted to look away, I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught in the gaze of something that wasn't supposed to exist. I tried to back away, but my legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. My stomach churned, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. I stumbled toward the door, but when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't open. It wouldn't budge. It was as if the train itself was keeping me inside, locking me away, keeping me in the same place. Trapped. Forever. I turned back to the man, or to the thing that looked like me, and that's when I saw it. The reflection. In the window. It wasn't just my face looking back at me. There was another face. A shadow. A figure standing beside me, just out of reach. I turned, but there was nothing behind me. Just the empty seats, the dim lights casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I could feel something pressing in on me. A suffocating weight like the walls of the train were closing in. The shadows around me grew darker. The train's metallic hum turning into a low, unnerving drone. A sound that reverberated deep in my bones. The air grew colder. The figure, me, just sat there, unblinking, unmoving, staring at me with those vacant eyes that felt like they were reaching into my very soul. And then, a thought broke through the fear, sharp and clear. This was it. This was my eternity. I wasn't alive, not anymore. And I hadn't been for years. The figure on the train wasn't just a passenger. It wasn't just some lost soul. It was me. And I had never escaped. I was still here, trapped in this endless loop, doomed to ride the train forever. The doors didn't open. The train didn't stop. And the figure across from me, my face, my body, never moved. We were bound together in this cycle, reliving the same moments over and over again. I wasn't alive anymore, and I never would be. The air in the train was suffocating, cold, dead. It pressed against my skin like a weight, dragging every breath from my lungs, suffocating the very life I thought I still had left. The walls of the car seemed to close in on me with every passing second, the darkness outside the window blending with the thickening blackness around me. The train hummed, its metallic groans vibrating through the seats, a constant reminder of my helplessness. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It wasn't just the train that had me trapped. It was me. I was the one holding myself here, binding myself to this nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I looked around the car, but nothing had changed. The figure across from me, the man who looked like me, was still sitting there, his eyes wide open, fixed, empty, like two hollow pits that swallowed the light. His gaze bore into me, unblinking, unmoving. I wanted to look away. I tried to, but it was impossible. His stare was like a magnetic force, pulling me in, dragging me deeper into the horror I had been running from for years. I could hear the sound of my heart in my ears, a steady thud that only grew louder as the realization set in. It was slow at first, creeping in like a shadow, but then it hit me all at once, cold and sharp. It was the kind of realization that shatters your world, the kind that makes everything you've known seem like a lie. I wasn't alive, not really, not anymore. The crash that had taken my family, that had taken me, wasn't the end. It wasn't the final chapter of my story. I had never left, not really. My body had died, but my soul had stayed behind, stuck in this endless loop. This train, this car, this nightmare, it wasn't some strange accident. It wasn't just a bad dream. It was my fate, my punishment. I leaned back against the seat, my hands trembling at my sides. I didn't want to look at the figure anymore. I didn't want to face the truth, but I couldn't escape it. The truth had me locked in place, chained to this reality I could no longer deny. It felt like time itself had stopped. The train moved, but the world outside the windows was a blur of darkness. It felt like we were floating through some kind of void, between life and death, between reality and the unknown. My body was here, but my mind, my soul, they were somewhere else, somewhere lost. I tried to stand, to walk toward the door, to get off this train, to escape the truth that was closing in around me. But my legs wouldn't move. The cold, the weight of everything I had just realized, it was too much. The door was right there in front of me, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles away. I couldn't reach it. I couldn't break free. The train didn't stop. The doors didn't open. I was trapped. The man across from me, I don't know how to explain it, but it was me. It was my face, my features, my body, but not me. It was like looking into a reflection that had been distorted, twisted, drained of everything that made me who I was. The eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, they stared at me like they knew, like they understood everything. And I was nothing but a fool for not realizing it sooner. I was dead. I had been dead for years, and I didn't even know it. The world above, the one I had thought I was still a part of, the one I had tried so desperately to cling to, had moved on without me. And I was left here in this train, reliving the same ride over and over again. There was no escape. I looked out the window, but all I saw was darkness. No city lights, no passing trains, just an endless void stretching out in front of me, swallowing everything. I closed my eyes, trying to block it all out, but the truth kept coming back. I was stuck here, stuck in this never-ending loop, reliving the same journey, trapped in a world where I no longer existed. The figure, myself, sat there silently, and I knew deep down that we were both the same. We were both caught in this cycle, prisoners of a fate that had already sealed us in. I wanted to scream, to fight, to tear at the walls of this place and demand to be free, but it was useless. The train didn't care, the man didn't care, and the truth was undeniable. I was already gone, and so was he. The train continued to roll on, its wheels clanking against the tracks, and I realized that this was it. This was my eternity. I was never going to leave. I had never really left at all. The air inside the train felt like it had thickened, pressing down on me with a suffocating weight. The cold that had been creeping in before was now unbearable. I could feel it in my bones, seeping through every part of me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. The train's hum had become louder, more intense, almost like it was alive, like it was breathing in rhythm with me. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending like this was just some nightmare I would eventually wake from. I stood there, frozen, staring at the man, myself, across from me. The eyes that stared back at me were hollow, empty, but they were also full of something deeper, something dark, something ancient. I had been avoiding it, running from it, pretending I hadn't noticed the truth. But now, there was no denying it. The truth came crashing down on me like a tidal wave, too brutal to escape. I wasn't alive. I had been dead for years. Since the crash. Since the moment everything was ripped away from me. I had died that night, and I had never left. I wasn't just stuck on this train. I was stuck in this loop. Trapped in this purgatory, this nightmare. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, the panic bubbling up inside of me like an eruption. I stepped toward the door, desperate for air, desperate for an escape. But the door wouldn't open. I pulled at the handle, but it was stuck. It wouldn't budge. The walls of the train seemed to close in on me, the metal groaning, the train vibrating with an energy I couldn't explain. I turned back, my gaze involuntarily drawn to the figure across from me. He was still there, still staring at me with those hollow eyes, the eyes that were mine. His body was the same as mine, his clothes, his features, but something was different. Something was wrong. He wasn't alive, but neither was I. And in that moment, the horrifying realization took root. The figure wasn't just me. He was the part of me that had died. He was the version of me that had never escaped this endless cycle. And I was stuck with him, trapped in this train, reliving the same journey over and over again. The hum of the train grew louder, more oppressive, like it was drowning out my thoughts, like it was forcing me to accept the truth. I reached out to touch the window, desperate to break free of the suffocating silence, but there was nothing. Just endless blackness outside. No city lights, no familiar streets, just darkness. A void. The voice came then. It wasn't a voice I heard with my ears. It was something deeper, something that echoed inside my mind, resonating in every fiber of my being. We are all trapped here, reliving the same ride. I stumbled back, my mind trying to reject the words, but they kept echoing in my skull, reliving the same ride, over and over, forever. I couldn't escape it. There was no way out. I had been dead this whole time. I had never left the train. The crash, the one that had killed my family, that had taken me, wasn't the end. It had been the beginning of this endless ride, this eternal purgatory where time didn't exist, where nothing moved forward, where nothing ever changed. I looked back at the figure. He hadn't moved. He was still there, staring at me. But something was different now. His eyes, those hollow eyes, seemed to be filled with something more. Understanding. Pity. Something dark that I couldn't understand. And then, as if on cue, the train's lights flickered. It was only for a second, but it was enough. The car shifted, the walls groaning as if the train were breathing, stretching, becoming something other than just a train. The space around me warped, bending, the seats shifting, the shadows twisting. The figure stood up, and it was then that I realized with a sinking heart, he wasn't just a reflection of me. He was my fate, my future. He was the one who had been stuck here for eternity, and now he was reaching for me. I tried to move, to step back, but my legs wouldn't respond. It was as if they were frozen in place, held down by some unseen force. I couldn't escape. There was nowhere to run. The figure took a step toward me, and I could feel the weight of his presence in the air, the coldness, the emptiness. It surrounded me, suffocated me. His eyes were locked on mine, and I knew in that moment that I wasn't just looking at a ghost. I was looking at my own doom, my own endless prison. "You were never meant to leave," the voice whispered. It was his voice, the voice of the man, the shadow, who looked like me but wasn't. "You were always meant to stay." I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, strangled by the overwhelming fear that gripped my chest. My vision blurred, the darkness pressed in. I could feel the edges of reality tearing apart. The figure, my reflection, reached out, his cold hand brushing against my arm. And in that moment I felt it, the finality, the truth that had always been there but that I had refused to see. I was never leaving, I was never going back. The crash that had taken me, the wreckage that had torn my family apart, it had been the beginning of something much worse than death. It had been the beginning of an endless ride, trapped on a train that would never stop, with no way out, no escape. And as the darkness took over, swallowing everything around me, I realized one horrifying thing. The train didn't stop. It never stopped, and neither did I. The air inside the train felt suffocating. The cold had wrapped itself around me like a vice, and with every breath I could feel it sinking deeper into my bones, dragging the life from me. It was as if the very atmosphere in this place was designed to smother me. The hum of the train's machinery had grown louder, almost overwhelming, vibrating through the seats, through my body, like the train was alive, breathing in sync with me. I was struggling to breathe, my chest tight, my head spinning, and yet I couldn't look away. The figure across from me, was still sitting there. His eyes, my eyes, locked on me, not blinking, not moving. That cold stare, that soulless gaze, it felt like he was looking through me, not at me. Like he could see everything I had buried deep inside, all the pain, all the regret. I wanted to scream, I wanted to move, to run, but I was frozen, trapped. The realization was slowly starting to crush me, but it was too late now. There was no escaping the truth. I wasn't alive, not anymore. I had been dead all along. The crash, the one that had taken my family, had never been the end. I had thought I was still living, that I had somehow survived. But the moment I had left that wreckage, I had left my life behind. This train, this place was my punishment, my prison. The loop had begun, and there was no way out. The train rattled, its wheels screeching as they turned, but nothing about it felt real anymore. The world outside the windows, the city, the streets, the life I had left behind, was gone. There was only darkness now. The train, the car, the man, I could feel the weight of it pressing on me, suffocating me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. My breath caught in my throat as the realization sunk in deeper, colder. The figure across from me, he wasn't just a reflection, he wasn't just a ghost, he was me. A twisted, broken version of me, stuck in this endless ride, and that's when I knew I wasn't the only one. I was the one who was trapped in this eternal loop. There was no end, no beginning, just this, just the train, just him. I stood, legs shaky, feeling like I was going to fall, but I couldn't stay still. I had to get away. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't move fast enough. The air around me grew heavier with every second, and the lights above flickered like dying stars, casting shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The train was no longer just a train. It was a cage, a tomb, a thing with a life of its own. I reached for the door, but when I touched the handle, it was cold. Colder than anything I had ever felt. My fingers went numb. The door wouldn't open. No matter how much I pulled, how hard I pushed, it wouldn't budge. The train didn't care. It wasn't going to let me leave. My eyes darted back to the man, to myself. His gaze never left me. Those empty eyes burned into my soul, and I could feel the presence of something darker, something older than anything I could comprehend. It was as if the train, the figure, the very air around me had become one, and I was trapped in it. Helpless. Forever. And then I heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, like the wind brushing against my skin, but then it grew louder, clearer, until it filled the entire car. We are all trapped here, reliving the same ride. I tried to move, to make sense of it all, but the words, his words, pulled me back, anchored me to this place. I was trapped. I had always been trapped. There was no escape. There was no end to this ride. The darkness outside the window seemed to close in, growing thicker until it swallowed everything. The lights flickered one last time, and the train shuddered, as if the whole thing was about to collapse. And in that instant, I understood. I was already dead. The figure that looked like me, that was me. It was the version of me that had never moved on, the part of me that was stuck here forever. And now, I was no different. I had become him. I was trapped in the same endless cycle, reliving the same moments, the same ride, again and again, forever. I turned to face him, myself, and I knew there was no escaping it. There was no way out. I wasn't going to wake up. I wasn't going to escape this nightmare. The air became thicker, colder, my vision blurred. My body began to fade. I could feel it, feel myself slipping away. The train, the man, the darkness, they all merged into one, and I realized that I wasn't just fading into the void, I was becoming it. And as I felt myself disappear, as I faded into the blackness, the last thought that passed through my mind was the terrifying truth. This was my eternity. I would never leave. I would never escape. The ride had no end. I had no end. And then, everything was gone. I can't explain it, but something changed the moment the train stopped. The whole world seemed to shift, bending and warping like it was made of fragile glass. The lights above flickered, casting odd, distorted shadows across the car. A deep, unsettling hum reverberated through the walls, so low that I could feel it in my chest. It wasn't just the train that felt wrong, it was everything. The very air felt thicker, colder, and yet everything was still. I turned to look outside the window, desperate to see something, anything familiar. But there was nothing. The familiar blur of city lights and passing stations had disappeared. There was only darkness. Black. Endless. The kind of darkness that swallows everything whole. It stretched out in front of me, around me, like it was consuming the very essence of reality itself. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a train, this wasn't some bad dream I could wake from. I had never left. The crash, the one that had taken my family, the one that had ended my life, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much worse. A beginning of this eternal, suffocating loop. The train wasn't just a place I rode, it was my prison, my purgatory. The afterlife I had never known, a place where the rules of the living didn't apply. I was dead, and I had been dead for years. But the horror didn't stop there. I was stuck here, trapped in this unending cycle. And the man across from me, the one who looked so much like me, wasn't just a figure in my mind. He was me, a broken, hollow version of what I used to be, wandering the same dark corridors of this eternal prison. His eyes, the same eyes as mine, locked onto mine, and in that moment I felt something inside of me crack. I couldn't escape, there was no escape, and I realized, for the first time, that I never would. The train began to move again, but it wasn't going anywhere. The tracks beneath it were endless, stretching out into the void. It didn't matter how far it traveled, it didn't matter how many stops it made. We were always stuck here, reliving the same ride, the same moment, again and again, until the very concept of time and reality had lost all meaning. I looked around, but nothing had changed. The walls were the same, the seats were the same. The darkness outside was still there, suffocating, swallowing every trace of light. The air felt cold against my skin, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. It was as if something had frozen me in place, tethered me to this nightmare with no chance of breaking free. I turned back to the figure across from me, but now it wasn't just him I was looking at, it was me. I wasn't looking at some reflection of my past, some ghost haunting the train. I was looking at my future, the part of me that had already given up, that had already faded into the abyss. He was the version of me that had surrendered to the nightmare, the one who had accepted the truth that I had been too afraid to face. There was no escape, not for him, not for me, not for any of us. The voice in my mind, the one I had been trying to ignore, whispered again. We are all trapped here, reliving the same ride. I wanted to scream, to break out of this suffocating silence, but I couldn't. There was no one left to hear me. The walls, the train, the world. It was all so cold, so empty. Nothing mattered anymore. I reached for the door, but it didn't open. The handles were frozen, immovable, as if mocking my last attempt to break free. The train continued on its endless journey, but I didn't know where we were going anymore. I didn't know where anything was. And then, the figure stood. The man, myself, moved slowly, deliberately, his hollow eyes never leaving mine. I tried to back away, but it was useless. My body wouldn't obey. I could feel him coming closer, and I knew that there was nowhere to run. He reached out, his hand stretching toward me, and the chill that followed it seemed to freeze me from the inside out. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my body trembling. I had nowhere to go, nothing to hold on to. This was it. This was my eternity. Trapped on this train, in this endless cycle, with no end, no light, no escape. And then I understood. I was already gone, and I had been for years. As the figure reached out and touched me, everything blurred. The train, the walls, the darkness. It all merged together. My body went numb, my mind slowly fading, slipping away like sand through my fingers. I felt myself dissolving, becoming part of the darkness. I wasn't alive anymore, and now I would never be. I was fading, disappearing into nothingness. And with that, the last remnants of my existence slipped away. The train continued its journey, its eternal journey, while I faded into the void, never to return. Forever trapped, forever lost. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.